setting up your meeting for custom streaming service, and they'll probably get all of this. What? Okay, it looks setting up your meeting for custom streaming service. There's the delay. Welcome everybody. We will get started in about a minute. I just want to leave a little bit of time for people who are joining us a little bit late. Hi, we have our first person with a chat message. So we know somebody's attending, which is great. Okay, it is 1 minute after. So let us get started. Thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Ed Benoit. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Local Arrangements Committee. And it is my pleasure to welcome you, and I will hand things over to the current president of SSA, Amy Rushing, who will get us started.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. As Ben said, I'm Amy Rushing. I'm the president of SSA. And I want to welcome you to the 49th annual meeting of the Society of Southwest Archivists. Now, technically, this is the 48th annual meeting because we were forced to cancel last year's meeting, but I think we should honor the tremendous amount of work the 2020 Local Arrangements Committee from Denton put into organizing the annual meeting that didn't happen. So I propose we still recognize the 2020 annual meeting as the 48th, and this will be the 49th. So this year is our first ever virtual conference. And as we know, planning a conference takes a lot of work from many individuals across our organization. Planning a virtual conference, especially for the first time, brings about a whole host of challenges. This year's theme, Going with the Flow, perfectly describes the Baton Rouge Local Arrangements Committee's ability to pivot from an in-person event to online. Pivoting to a virtual conference affected the work of every single annual meeting committee as they tried to figure out how to translate our yearly meeting activities into a virtual environment. From online repository tours to Slotto and workshops, they aren't skipping a beat. And I hear we have representation from 26 states, Washington, D.C., and Canada. And as of this morning, we have 370 conference attendees, which is a record for us. The money that we'll be making from this conference will go towards scholarships. So this is really huge for us. There are so many people to thank. I'd like to give a special thanks to Ed Benoit and Leslie Bourgeois and all of the members of the Local Arrangements Committee, incoming President Daniel Alonzo and the Program Committee, and Lily Carroll and the Professional Development Committee for their tireless work in putting together a fun, educational, and engaging meeting. I'd also like to thank all of the session moderators who will be ensuring each session goes as smoothly as possible. And I thank you also goes out to Lynn Livingston and LSU's College of Human Science and Education, who is providing the technical platform as well as a lot of guidance that is allowing us to hold this meeting virtually. I'd like to thank our vendors as well as our bronze sponsors. Our bronze sponsors are Texas State Historical Records and Advisory Board and the Cushing Memorial Library and Archives at Texas A&M. And last but not least, a big, huge thank you to our gold sponsor and sponsor of this plenary session, LSU's School of Library and Information Science. Now I'd like to turn it over to Leslie Bourgeois. Leslie is the archivist at Louisiana Public Broadcasting and the co-chair of this year's Local Arrangements Committee.
Thank you, Amy. On behalf of my co-chair, Ed Benoit, and the entire Local Arrangements Committee, we are thrilled to welcome you to this week's conference, and we hope that you have a great week. It is my pleasure to introduce today's plenary speaker, Casey Davis Kaufman, my friend, my fellow LSU SLIS alum, and my colleague in preserving public media. Casey, who is a native of Mississippi, is a 2012 graduate of the LSU School of Library and Information Science and was honored as the 2019 Alumna of Distinction. She serves as the Associate Director of the GBH Archives. GBH is the public television and radio station in Boston, Massachusetts. She is also the project manager for the American Archive of Public Broadcasting, a joint project between GBH and the Library of Congress to preserve the 70+ year history of public media in the United States. To date, 120,000 public television and public radio programs have been preserved through this project, including some here at LPB. She is also a leader in the Association of Moving Image Archivists, having served on the board of directors from 2017 to 2019. She also co-founded the Continuing Education Advisory Committee, the Diversity and Inclusion Fellowship Task Force, and the Advocacy Committee of the board. She now works remotely from her home in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and has taken on the additional challenge of working as the project manager of the University of Tennessee Library's Rising from the Ashes, the Chimney Tops 2 Wildfires Oral History Project. So without further ado, I'm glad to welcome Casey Davis Kaufman.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Let me just share my screen, pull that up. Okay. So good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for welcoming me and all of us into your homes today. I'm honored to be here with you, and I'd like to thank the conference organizers for their hard work in putting this event together. I hope that today's session will be as interactive as possible, so I encourage you to contribute your ideas and thoughts in the chats throughout the session. And before we get started, I thought we could just check in with each other. How are you feeling? We've been over a year into this pandemic, and I hope that many of you and your loved ones have been able to get your vaccines already or will be able to get them soon. And what are you looking forward to most from this conference? If you want to add any responses that come to mind in the chat, please feel free to do so. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the lands on which I live and work today and honor the traditional stewards of the land. To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory you reside on, and a way of honoring the indigenous people who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought us to reside on the land and to seek to acknowledge our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current, ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation in it. I'm speaking to you today from the lands of the Cherokee, Yuchi, and Shawnee peoples, past and present. I acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from these territories, and I honor with gratitude the land and the people who have stewarded it over the generations. I invite you all to look up whose land you are on at native-land.ca, and Ed's going to put that in the chat for us, and feel free to share your land acknowledgement in the chat. And before we get started with the content of my presentation, I'd like to first offer an opportunity for all of us to get grounded and present in this moment. There are so many distractions around us at home. The lack of face-to-face interaction can be draining, and the added stress of our news feeds and challenges we're all dealing with in our personal lives right now can make it difficult to remain centered and focused on the task at hand. I have found it beneficial to start my day and at times throughout the day to reset and refocus my attention in the moment, and also to non-judgmentally check in with myself and think about how I'm feeling using meditation and mindfulness practices. This is also an exercise or a type of exercise that you could offer to your team or colleagues. You don't have to participate, but if you'd like to, I invite you to take a few minutes. You're going to have some privacy here. You can close your eyes and listen, and I'm just going to walk us through a body scan. So begin by bringing your attention into your body. You can close your eyes if that is comfortable for you. You can notice your body seated wherever you're seated, feeling the weight of your body on the chair, on the floor. Take a few deep breaths. And as you take a deep breath, bring in more oxygen, enlivening the body. And as you exhale, have a sense of relaxing more deeply. You can notice your feet on the floor. Notice the sensations of your feet touching the floor, the weight and pressure, vibration, heat. You can notice your legs against the chair, pressure, heaviness, lightness. Notice your back against the chair. Bring your attention into your stomach area. If your stomach is tense or tight, let it soften. Take a breath. Notice your hands. Are your hands tense or tight? See if you can allow them to soften. Notice your arms. Feel any sensation in your arms. Let your shoulders be soft. Notice your neck and throat. Let them be soft. Relax. Soften your jaw. Let your face and facial muscles be soft. Then notice your whole body present. Take one more breath. Be aware of your whole body as best as you can. Take a breath, and when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you for joining me in that meditation, which was provided by the UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center. All right. So let me provide a little context on who I am before we dive in. As Leslie mentioned, I'm the Associate Director of the GBH Archives in Boston and Project Manager for the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. I've been working at GBH for 9 years, and before that was living in Baton Rouge, where we were supposed to be today, getting my MLIS at LSU. And since July 2019, I have been living and working remotely from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. So not Southwest, but close enough. Over the course of my career, I've also been an active member in the Association of Moving Image Archivists, which I encourage all of you to consider joining or attending a future conference if you're dealing with anything audiovisual. It's a wonderful community, and I think our next conference, whenever that will be, it's usually in November, will be in El Paso. In a few moments, I'll talk a little bit about some insights I've gained working in the field over these past several years, but I also will just want to share an overview of the GBH Archives and the American Archive of Public Broadcasting and what we've been up to over the past several years. So at the GBH Archives, we are responsible for the long-term preservation and access to the GBH collection of production assets and administrative records. If GBH doesn't ring a bell for you, we are the Boston-based public broadcasting station responsible for the production of some of the PBS shows you might be familiar with. We produce fully 1/3 of the content broadcast on PBS, including Nova, Antiques Roadshow, American Experience, Frontline, Masterpiece Theater. In addition to television, we have 2 radio stations and a large award-winning digital department that is the #1 producer for the websites you will see on pbs.org. And as you can see, we produce a wide variety of programming from public affairs to history and science to children's programs, arts, culture, drama, and how-tos. And we've been on the air since 1951 with radio and 1955 with television. At the heart and through our mission, we are an educational and cultural institution. We originated out of a consortium of academic universities in the Boston area. And because we've produced so much, we have a large archive of educational programming that is of interest to scholars and researchers, in addition to the public. The work of our department in the archives includes management of our physical collection, digitization and digital preservation, working with our productions to receive recent content into the archives, circulation of material with our productions, providing access to researchers and the general public, and footage licensing to other productions to support our work. And we're currently undertaking a massive project in the archives to digitize about 1/3 of all of our video and audio assets, all of our master material and original footage, thanks to a challenge grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities and several major donors. And in collaboration with the Library of Congress, GBH is also home to the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. Founded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, GBH and the library became the permanent stewards of the initiative in 2013. Our mission is to coordinate a national effort to preserve significant historical content created by public media before its content is lost to posterity. And we also provide a centralized web portal for access to the unique programming aired by stations over public media's 70+ year history. Through this collaboration, the Library of Congress is responsible for the long-term preservation of the materials we collect, and the GBH Archives is responsible for managing our metadata and website, public access to the collection, as well as outreach to content creators, researchers, and the public. But we share overall governance responsibilities and make decisions collaboratively pretty much around everything, and it's a great partnership. To date, we have digitized more than 121,000 public television and radio programs from more than 140 public broadcasting stations and producers and archives across the United States and territories. The entire collection is accessible on location at the Library of Congress and GBH when we're not in the midst of a pandemic, and more than half of the collection is available within the United States in our online reading room at americanarchive.org. Which we launched in October 2015. Much of the material that is not available for online access is also eligible for bona fide research purposes via our limited research access service, which has been really helpful to us during the pandemic while folks have not been able to come on premises. But we have been able to make available over 61,000 programs. So about 50% of the collection is available online to anyone within the United States to access. Our efforts over the past several years have been focused on collecting, preserving, and presenting materials from stations and communities that are underrepresented in the archive. Some of our ongoing and most recent projects include grants from CLEAR, Council on Library and Information Resources, to digitize public radio and television programming from across Kansas, American Samoa, and New Mexico. And you will learn more about that project at my colleague Megan Rose's presentation, I believe later today. And NHPRC has also just awarded a grant to digitize historic programming from WIPR in Puerto Rico. And we're finishing up another NHPRC grant with the University of Georgia's Brown Media Archive to digitize every locally aired public television and radio program submitted to the Peabody Awards between 1941 and 1999, as well as a CLEAR grant to digitize historic sermons, public affairs, and cultural programs that were aired and produced between 1961 and 1971 by the Riverside Church in the city of New York, their public radio station, WRVR-FM. We've also digitized every broadcast program from PBS NewsHour and its predecessor series from 1975 to 2019. We're currently in the process of ingesting 50 years of Sesame Street, as well as the Bill Moyers collection, among others. And the Library of Congress has also been digitizing its collection of programs distributed by National Educational Television, which was the precursor distribution network to PBS from 1952 to 1972. And we've made available over 1,000 of these programs online, including over 100 episodes of Black Journal, which was the first nationally televised public affairs program produced for, about, and eventually by Black Americans. So I've spent a lot of time over the past several months thinking about the theme of the conference, Going with the Flow. When I first met with the conference organizers about the conference, it was over a year ago, and we had just entered the pandemic lockdown. At that time, we didn't know whether or not this conference would be able to take place in person in Baton Rouge along the Mississippi River. In the first month or so of lockdown, I do think our mindset was really to just go with the flow, or to adjust and flow, as my dad always advised me to do in the midst of change. I also fully acknowledge that there are probably folks in our audience who didn't have a choice to stay home and have been working in your office for much of the year or for the full duration. But the early days of the pandemic were a time unprecedented, and we just needed to figure out how to survive, both literally and figuratively. We are now over a year into the pandemic, and thankfully, many of us have by now been able to get our vaccines, and more of us are now able to safely resume going into the office as needed. Over the past year, our country has also reckoned with centuries of systemic injustices and racism against Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, which was brought to the fore in the wakes of the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, who at the time were just the latest people added to a long and growing list of Black people who have lost their lives at the hands of brutal police and vigilantes. And we continue to see racist violence against Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, whose stories amplify hundreds of years of invisibility and exclusion in the United States. What a pivotal and critical moment in which to live, to act, and to be an archivist. Going with the flow. In thinking about this theme of the conference, the concept of water, currents, of movement and movements, my mind took me back to my years growing up when my family would take an annual trip to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, where we'd hike and picnic and visit the tourist town of Gatlinburg. But one of my favorite family activities was the day we would spend whitewater rafting the Nantahala River around Bryson City, North Carolina. The Nantahala ran through a beautiful and scenic gorge, and the water ran clear and cold all year round. The name Nantahala is a Cherokee word, which translates into land of the noonday sun, because the canyon gets little sunlight until the sun is almost at its peak around noon. Our whitewater rafting trips took us down the river about 8 miles and was a good river run for beginners with mostly class 2 and one class 3 rapid called Nantahala Falls right above Takeout. Before we could start our trip down the river, all rafters were required to watch a training video with tips on how to stay stable in your boat and avoid capsizing. So wearing a rented and somewhat smelly kid's wetsuit, I remember being escorted into a dark room with a TV and a VCR where they'd play a training video recorded perhaps sometime in the mid to early 1990s. And the first tip we learned when you're running down the river and coming upon a rapid, you want to make sure your boat is facing directly toward the waves rather than coming upon it from an angle. You want to hit the waves head on. Hitting it from the side would result in your boat dipping down into the current, and you would fill with water and you'd probably flip. Trust me, that happened once or twice. Hit the waves head on. That trip down memory lane got me thinking about the work of archivists in these times and the challenges we're collectively facing that we must face head on. One of these challenges is the imminent loss of the audiovisual record of the 20th and 21st centuries. In 2012, the Library of Congress issued its National Recording Preservation Plan. It stated that many analog formats must be digitized within the next 15 to 20 years before degradation makes preservation efforts all but impossible. It's 2021 now, and our profession is in a race against time. Moreover, the Library of Congress reported that audiovisual materials are the fastest growing segment of our nation's archives and special collections. Is our raft facing the rapid, or are we at an angle? A 2014 study by AVP and the Northeast Document Conservation Center found that there were over 537 million sound recordings held in collecting institutions in the United States. 57% of those were either rare or unique, and only 17% had been digitized by the time the paper was published. No such study has been conducted for film or video materials, but it is likely that the numbers would be similar or higher. Since this paper was published, the Mellon Foundation has made a significant investment in the digitization of at-risk audiovisual materials through the Council on Library and Information Resources Recordings at Risk program, for which we at GBH have been very grateful. But where is our raft pointed? Organizations and communities around the world contain significant audiovisual collections documenting their social, political, cultural, and artistic history and landscapes. Due to the limited resources and lack of archival expertise, these collections, many of them are often fated to languish on shelves and in closets, lying dormant for decades and inaccessible to the communities they document. In order to address this challenge, we need to dedicate ourselves and our institutions to obtaining the training and education in the best practices of audiovisual preservation. We need a willingness to collaborate, and we need, for a time, to reset our institutional preservation priorities to focus on these media that are actively dying and must be rescued and digitized before it is too late. Of course, the cost to digitize this material is a huge factor. One way in which we at the American Archive of Public Broadcasting have been able to establish collaborative efforts to preserve media has been through statewide digitization grant projects in states like Kansas and New Mexico, both of which were funded by CLEAR. In each state, one organization has taken the lead on coordinating the project and tapes to be digitized and serving as the primary liaison with the vendor and with the AAPB. These photos here are from New Mexico PBS, and that's my colleague Megan Rose, who's going to be talking later today about the New Mexico Public Media Digitization Project. And within this grant, and both of these grants, we were able to build in a full-time project archivist to serve in the role at the lead partner in each state. In New Mexico, 5 total stations are contributing tapes to be digitized through the project, and there are a total of 7 stations in Kansas. We also built into the grants allocation of funding for someone at each station to support the project archivist in providing access to their building, packing of tapes, and providing guidance and knowledge about their collections. A huge benefit to this approach is that it creates an economy of scale, as well as knowledge of scale, raising the threshold for impact while saving in costs gained through increased participation and scope. For example, in Kansas, having 7 stations contribute a total of 4,000 tapes to be digitized through the project ultimately lowered the rate per item to be digitized when compared to just 1 station managing a project independently. In addition to saving funds through the increase in the scales of the collections, we're saving on staffing, shipping, and setup costs. This model also helps ensure that the recordings from smaller stations, those in rural areas and those serving communities that have been historically underrepresented, are not left out of the historic record, and their voices and recordings are preserved. I don't want to go into more detail about this project now because Megan Rose is going to be talking with you all about it later. But one thing I would like us to think about is this challenge, this wave we're coming upon. We could be hitting it directly through collaborative models that not only make the work and the costs more feasible, but also help us ensure that no one's voice is left out of the process. We will go farther together. And as we talked about earlier, education and training is key to ensuring that we have the knowledge and skills needed to address these challenges in our field. And we are able to hit them head on in a strategic way, rather than a way that is reactionary. Until recently, there were only 3 graduate programs in the United States that offer specialized training and education in audiovisual preservation. New York University's Moving Image Archiving and Preservation program offers a 2-year program focused on the preservation of physical and digital audiovisual media, which costs approximately $30,000 per semester. UCLA's Master of Library and Information Science program with a specialization in media archival studies costs $32,374 annually for non-California residents, half of that for California residents. And the University of Rochester's Masters in Film and Media Preservation, which combines a 1-year film preservation and restoration program with 1 year of study in film and media theory, costs about $45,000 per year. And although these programs offer exceptional methods to gain skills and industry contacts in the field of audiovisual preservation, they are all located on the East and West Coasts. The barriers to entry are high, and there are a few other structured opportunities that exist for students to gain a foothold in the audiovisual preservation profession. Furthermore, a syllabus analysis of accredited library and information science programs conducted in 2017 found that across 45 archives-focused graduate programs, only 11 offered courses in the preservation of audiovisual materials, and most of these were taught within programs in the US Northeast and Midwest. As I have learned over the course of my career at GBH, audiovisual preservation and digitization requires significant hands-on training in addition to a strong understanding of very technical concepts that are hard to grasp and understand after just one lecture or a workshop. How can we ensure that the people working in archives now and those coming into the field are prepared to address the magnetic media crisis? When I was in graduate school at LSU, my professor, Dr. Elizabeth Dow, led a program that was called the Archival Training Collaborative, and I was her graduate assistant, along with Felicia Thomas Williamson, who I think is in the audience today and will be presenting later this week. The ATC served a tri-state area in Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi, and trained trainers that went out across this region to teach archivists and paraprofessionals working in archives the best practices of preservation. We taught workshops on care and handling of collections, arrangement and description, disaster planning, and much more. Might it be time for such a regional training collaborative to be established to support training in audiovisual preservation as one of the most urgent challenges of our time? Back in 2018, we at the American Archive of Public Broadcasting wanted to make an impact on this apparent skills gap in our field, while also supporting our mission to preserve public media in locations that were underrepresented in the archive. We developed the Public Broadcasting Preservation Fellowship Program with funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which provided paid AV preservation fellowships to graduate students enrolled in non-specialized LIS programs. Through the program, the fellows received hands-on experience in audiovisual preservation through public media digitization projects. After an in-depth immersion week in Boston, fellows were paired with a public media station in their area where they worked to digitize real-world materials that were desperately in need of care. The stations benefited by having a paid fellow dedicate time and needed energy to preserving their unique and historically significant programming, while the students benefited by gaining hands-on training in cataloging, digitization, and digital media management. The LIS programs provided the infrastructure needed to support the fellows, as well as space for purchased digitization equipment, and they benefited through connecting with experts in AV preservation and gaining opportunities to build AV preservation into future curricula through the knowledge gained and equipment purchased through the program. And finally, the AAPB provided a home for preserving the digitized collections, as well as training and mentorship to the students and faculty. And we also benefited by receiving preservation copies of all of the media that were digitized by the fellows to help fill important gaps in the collection. The PBPF pilot project supported 10 fellowships through the spring and summer semesters of 2018. And during the course of the project, we partnered with LIS programs at UNC Chapel Hill, University of Missouri, University of Oklahoma, San Jose State University, and Clayton State University. Earlier, when I listed the 3 master's programs that provide specialized training in AV preservation, I said that until recently, these were the only programs that existed. After our first PBPF program funded by IMLS, we began a partnership with the University of Alabama's School of Library and Information Studies, which at the time had received a major unrestricted gift to support the school's activities. And Director James Elmborg saw this as an opportunity to expand the program's focus to include in-depth training in audiovisual preservation. The UA SLIS program is a distance education master's degree with students all over the country. And thus we saw UA as a perfect collaborator in helping us continue to engage. Sorry, I just saw, I can only focus on one thing at a time, and I just saw a note come in. But the UA SLIS program is a distance education master's degree with students all over the country, and thus we saw UA as a perfect collaborator in helping us continue to engage students in the preservation of public media. The major gift received by University of Alabama is now being used to support the annual EBSCO Scholarship Program for students interested in the preservation and archiving of audiovisual materials. Through the scholarship program, students go through the MLIS degree, and in their second year of the program, they receive coursework and hands-on training in audiovisual preservation. The students are then paired with their local public media station, where they undertake their public broadcasting preservation fellowships, and all of the material digitized by the students are sent to the AAPB for preservation and public access. 4 students have gone through a pilot of the program already in Alabama, Florida, and Virginia, and we're now in the process of pairing the first cohort of 8 EBSCO scholars with their stations, with fellowships beginning this fall. With the scholarship, the total cost of this AV master's degree for all students, in-state and out-of-state, is about $7,000. I see this new specialized program in AV preservation as a critical and new pathway to entry into the field of audiovisual preservation, creating opportunities for folks who would otherwise not be able to afford the cost of one of the existing programs or have the option of moving to the East or West coasts. UA's program could truly be transformative for our field. Hit the waves head on. Back to that story I was telling you earlier about my whitewater rafting trip. The second piece of advice in the whitewater rafting training was to anticipate what's next. Rivers are a dynamic medium, and when you're whitewater rafting, you can't wait until you get to a rock to go around it. You need to look where you're going and plan for it so that you have time to make your move. You have to keep your gaze ahead and look where you want to go. I'll add that there was one year my grandpa, who was our boat leader, must have tuned out by the time that we came to that tip in the video, because we must have gotten stuck on every rock in the river that day. Keep your gaze ahead. Where do we want to go as a field? What direction should we be heading? Looking ahead, how can we better serve our users? And how can the work of archivists in stewarding our cultural heritage help us all, society at large, keep our gaze ahead and help avoid the mistakes of the past? One of the ways I think we can strategically navigate the future of access and use of our collections is through advocacy of open licensing of the collections we steward and acquire, as well as those newly created or in the process of creation. I understand that many of you are working with collections whose copyright holders are no longer around or have complicated rights issues. We have that same challenge. But one thing we have learned when working directly with donors on new acquisitions of programming into the AAPB is that if you don't ask, you don't get. And if you do, you might. A few years ago, we updated our standard deed of gift to include the option for the donor to assign a Creative Commons license to the materials they are donating to the archive. Out of 61 deeds of gift we've received since 2015, 51% of donors have assigned a Creative Commons license. Each time we engage a donor about their deed of gift, we walk them through the terms and discuss the value of open licensing of their content. And once they know that half of other donors have assigned a Creative Commons license, they are often more open to considering it for their collection. It's kind of like the solar power contagion. When one house in a neighborhood gets solar panels, pretty likely you're going to see their neighbors getting them too. But as I mentioned, we also deal with materials in our collection that are not openly licensed, and oftentimes the station that provided us with the material does not know anything about the contractual agreements that may have existed at the time of production. Considerations like music, third-party stills and footage, not to mention talent, narration, and more have caused paralysis among archivists who would otherwise want to make their collections more broadly available. Looking ahead, how can we better serve our users and make our audiovisual collections more accessible to them? At the American Archive of Public Broadcasting, we've worked closely with our legal counsel at the Library of Congress, GBH, and have been advised by fellows at the Cyber Law Clinic at Harvard's Berkman Klein Center to create what we call our institutional bucket policy. The goal of the policy, yes, we can share the deed of gift. The goal of the policy is to provide guidance and documentation around the protocol for determining whether content in the AAPB collection should be eligible for online access in consideration of fair use. With the exception of a few edge cases, our first step to making something available is always to obtain at least a quitclaim from the producing station. A quitclaim basically states that to the extent that the donor has any rights in the materials, they are granting us permission to make the material available online. It is then our risk in making the full programs available in consideration of potential third-party materials in the program. More about that in a moment. Material that is made available in our online reading room is behind a firewall subject to a terms of use. So when someone comes to our website and tries to access something in the online reading room for the first time, they have to agree to our online reading room rules of use. And the content is in a bucket category approved by council as fair use. Most materials are made available for streaming only, with the exception of material that is Creative Commons licensed, and everything is subject to a notice and takedown policy. So once we have a quitclaim, the collection proceeds through the bucket analysis to determine if we can make it available online. The bucket policy includes a list of all known genres in our collection, a definition of each genre, a fair use analysis or justification, any additional steps for access eligibility, such as if it's a pretty significant documentary program that we know was aired nationally, we're going to look it up on Amazon to see if, or look it up online to see if it's still being sold and if anyone's making revenue off of it. And then it also includes a determination about whether that genre is eligible for online access. And in implementing this policy, we, the archivists, are able to make these access decisions and bring only those questionable items to the legal counsel. Decisions about access are made at the series, like TV or radio series level, rather than at the item level for material that's part of a series, allowing us to review materials much more quickly and efficiently. We ask ourselves, what is the nature of this program? Is it a documentary, a talk show, a news magazine, a dramatic performance? Is our use transformative from the original use? Are people watching it today for a different reason than they did when they sat down on their couch in 1975? The more informational or factual the program, the more likely we can feel comfortable making it available online. We do, of course, consider the risk factors, such as whether a program contains significant third-party material, or if the material is raw and unedited, we consider privacy of the individuals, especially around sensitive topics. But after 6 years and 60,000 programs we've made available online, we've never received a takedown notice. Creating policies around access, training, and giving archivists the tools we need to evaluate our collections and make fair use decisions about their access, and taking a little bit of risk will help ensure that we do not put our missions at risk. I'd be happy to provide you all more information about our bucket policy approach. There are other ways we've let users steer our direction. On the first day of each month, we do an analysis of our website analytics from the previous month to explore how people are getting to the website, what are they searching for, what content is most popular, and how are they navigating the website. In examining these statistics, we look for patterns and consider how we can better serve users based on what we learn. For example, last year we noticed that about 2% of all referrals from other sites were coming in from Wikipedia. That was interesting to us because we had not been adding links or content to Wikipedia. But it helped us realize that if more Wikipedia pages included references and links to relevant material in the archive, that percentage would likely increase. We began hosting online Wikipedia editathons with volunteers in the early days of the pandemic, focusing on the collections in the archive, documenting voices underrepresented both historically and on Wikipedia, such as interviews from American Experience's Freedom Writers, Eyes on the Prize interviews, and the In Black America radio series. In addition to hosting Wikipedia-athons, each time we now launch a new collection or exhibit on our website, one of our first orders of business is to find relevant Wikipedia pages and add links from Wikipedia back to the specific content in the collection. In just a year, we have seen that 2% of referral stat increase to 19%, with a dramatic increase in visits to the site overall. I think there is a session later this week on the discrepancies in the robustness of content in Wikipedia for people of color versus white people, and how archives can help address this issue. I am looking forward to it. As we look ahead, also recognize that we are never going to be able to get through our backlog to be able to richly describe every metadata record for every item we've digitized. We work with donors to provide us with as much item level metadata as they can send to us, but these are often lacking in rich descriptions needed for search and discovery. We have a small staff and we cannot dedicate resources at this time toward a full-time cataloging position, but we need to know what's in our collection to be able to make decisions about it, and users need access. We're committed to accessibility, and at the same time, we seek to continue growing the collection well into the future. Acknowledging what a monumental and impossible undertaking that would be, we have steered toward the use of machine learning tools to support our efforts in creating metadata about our collections. Since 2017, we have used the Quality speech-to-text tool to create transcripts for every digitized item in our collection. Of course, they are not fully accurate, but they generate good enough data that can be indexed to support search and discovery of content in the archive. To correct the transcripts, we've launched crowdsourcing initiatives to engage the public in correcting them. To date, I think we've corrected about 2,000 transcripts, which is a very small drop in the bucket, but we've been able to prioritize content that contains significant errors, as well as collaborate with stations that contributed the materials to engage their communities in this effort. This work has had a huge impact on awareness of the archive, and we've seen significant increases in the number of visits to our site from search engines based on keyword searching and the availability of transcripts. We're now at a point where there are some really cost-effective solutions out there for speech-to-text transcription, such as the open source speech-to-text tool we use called Quality, as well as tools like Amazon Transcribe, Trent, Rev, and others. Transcription of AV content requires resources that are too often lacking at our institutions, but the work is critical to ensuring accessibility of our collections. Developing open source tools to support this work and advocating to our institutions and funders for these needed resources can help ensure that these accessibility practices can be sustained. Looking even farther ahead, there are more possibilities downstream with regard to using machines to create metadata. Right now, we're working with computer scientists at Brandeis on a Mellon-funded initiative called CLAMS, or Computational Linguistics Applications for Multimedia Services, to explore and develop other open source tools that can capture text from slates, lower thirds, and credits, as well as produce higher quality transcripts for collections with wide varieties of accents and speech patterns. Indiana University and AVP are pioneering similar efforts. We fully acknowledge that there is certainly much work to be done to improve these tools to better reflect the wide variety of voices represented in our collections. It's a fact that the language models for the speech-to-text tool we are using were trained on Wall Street Journal articles and the voices of NPR reporters, which represent only a small slice of the population, primarily white Northern US men. It's something we are exploring and we are working to address. And a final point I want to make related to this concept of keeping our gaze ahead is this. As stewards of cultural heritage and of our individual and shared histories, we have a huge responsibility in helping steer society in a direction towards a future that values knowledge, is anti-racist and equitable for all, trusts science, and overall seeks to avoid the mistakes of our past. By elevating the voices of those who have been historically marginalized from the dominant historical narrative, by providing new pathways to entry into our field and welcoming those from backgrounds that have been underrepresented in our profession, by prioritizing the collection, preservation, and access of collections created by communities who have been underserved, and by engaging those communities in the process, by critically examining our traditional practices around description, and by moving toward a new era of inclusive and decolonized cataloging, by engaging educators and our librarian colleagues in informational literacy work and advocacy, and by curating collections that document these enduring issues facing society, we can make enduring impacts. History is written based on the sources people have access to. And all of this work is needed at this moment, and we cannot be objective and neutral third parties in this process of reckoning, reinterpretation, and renewal. Keep our gaze ahead. Let me go back to my whitewater rafting story. The third thing you have to do when you're paddling down a river is keep aware of your posture. You want to make sure that you're leaning forward and into the rapids. If you're not intentional about your posture and positioning in the boat, you can easily flip or become vulnerable to letting water overtake your raft. Lean forward, lean in. This past year for me has been a new lesson in leaning forward and in listening, in being aware and intentional in my communication and in empathy. Many of us didn't have coursework in management or leadership, and we certainly didn't have coursework in how to apply these leadership skills in a remote working environment or a global crisis. So in the transition of our entire staff and becoming remote during a pandemic, and in consideration of emotional unrest that so many were dealing with in the summer of 2020, as well as the turbulent months of November 2020 through January 2021, when our democratic process was questioned and under attack, culminating with the insurrection against the US Capitol on January 6th, as well as the heightened racism against Asian American and Pacific Islander communities during the course of the pandemic. I've been thinking deeply about leadership practices and empathy during these unprecedented times. I found that even the slightest shifts in focus, in mindfulness and perspective during this time can have a great impact on the well-being of our teams and of ourselves. I think my whole experience of working remotely has been a lesson in mindfulness, in recognizing the importance of clear and direct communication, of maintaining emotional connections with people from afar and on screen, of understanding the perspectives and context of others' feelings and situations, of the importance of visual cues, body language, and intentional verbal language in all that we do in our work. And I hope that some of these lessons will come along with us as we move into post-pandemic life. If you don't mind sharing, I'm curious what practices you've implemented at your institutions to support listening, intention, and compassion during these times. And what do you hope to take with you beyond the pandemic? Feel free to put those in the chat. One way that we have leaned forward and in at the AAPB is by intentionally engaging users from a variety of perspectives to advise us in our work. In 2018, we established 3 advisory committees to provide guidance to us around scholarly audiences and uses of the archive, K through 12 educators, as well as a committee representing the public media stations and producers we seek to serve. We host 3 calls per year with each committee, and we've received incredible insights from each group that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to gather without their support. Several committee members have gone on to create exhibits, educational materials, presented or invited us to present at conferences and webinars, published articles highlighting material in the archive, and created podcasts. As knowledge of the collection increases among both content holders and users, there's more willingness on the part of all to participate. I'll share 2 examples of some of the good advice we received from our educator and scholar advisory committees as a result of leaning in. The educators working with us have given us excellent insights into how teachers look for content online. Some of these goals we're still working toward, such as the ability to provide curated selections of items targeted toward learning objectives. But they've also made us aware that teachers look for openly available material on open educational resource platforms targeted for educator use. Through the connections they've helped us establish, we've begun sharing our special collections and exhibits with OER platforms, including the American Federation of Teachers' Share My Lesson and the National Humanities Center's Humanities in Class Digital Library. Each time we launch a new collection or exhibit, we create resources in both of these platforms, which I encourage your organizations to also join. And collections and exhibits are made searchable and discoverable to the thousands of educators who use these tools. We've also begun working with PBS Learning Media to link from the educational resources available on their site directly to relevant content in the AAPB. Many public media stations create resources for PBS Learning Media, and I encourage you to get connected with your local station to explore potential methods of collaborations to expose your collections to new audiences. Our Scholar Advisory Committee has shared with us that many scholars want to do more with the collections we've made available than just watch or listen to them on our site. They want to incorporate them into published articles, embed them into their course platforms, and use them in digital humanities projects. By the time we created the committee, we had already exposed our metadata and transcripts via an API to allow for use in digital projects, but our committee had more ideas. For much of the material in the AAPB, we're still constrained by copyright issues when it comes to providing physical copies of materials in our collections. But our legal counsel has determined that we can allow embedding of content from our website. So that's what we did. We built a new feature that allows anyone to embed a video from the archive. We call it Share a Segment because not only can you embed a full video, but you can also select a segment from the program and embed a segment from selected time codes. The feature has been used a number of times on other sites, including other public media station websites, other archives, online scholarly work, and in work written by journalists. A final way that we've sought to lean forward and in is simply by creating a feedback form on our website. It's just very simple. It's linked directly in the top menu on our homepage and demonstrates our goals to providing a good and satisfying experience for researchers who visit our site. We also have provided a statement on every metadata record that if you have more information about this content, we want to know. And we've received helpful insights from people who know more about the location or people featured in the program or were involved in the production itself. We can't always directly address the requests we receive, but we can only learn so much by looking at our analytics. And the more we open ourselves to guidance from those we seek to serve, the greater impact we can yield for our communities. By having open and regular conversations with our audiences and by keeping up to date on the needs of their fields, we can provide solutions that can support enhanced usability and engagement with the collections we steward. Lean forward, lean in. Okay, I'm going to take you back to that whitewater rafting excursion one more time. By the end of this, you are probably going to be ready for your own adventure and you can skip the training video. So the last thing I learned about river running is to always keep your paddle in the water. Keep paddling. When you have your blade actively moving in the water, it acts like a brace and it will help you stay afloat and stable, and it will make you less vulnerable to the rapids you will face. So the last bit of advice here is keep paddling. Keep listening, keep learning, keep growing, keep collaborating, keep moving, keep relevant. And when we get to some calm waters up ahead, we're going to slow down our raft and we're going to jump out and we're going to take a moment to peacefully float with our feet in the water, looking up at the sky and behind us at what we just successfully navigated upstream. But then we're going to get back in the boat and we're going to keep paddling. This past year, we have been swept up in swift currents and we have traversed them. I would go further to say that we need to be not only navigators of currents, but creators of currents. Through this experience, I believe we have begun to gaze ahead and navigate the rapids in a more strategic, collaborative, inclusive, and empathetic way. So I thank you, my colleagues, for the constant inspiration and hope that you have provided me over the past year. I will see you downstream. Keep paddling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Casey. Of course, you weren't seeing the long stream of chat, and I was very interested in seeing what everybody was saying. The first question that came in was actually about the deed of gift, which you already responded to, about would you be willing to share the deed of gifts form? Next, somebody asked, what is the national AV group you mentioned in the beginning? And two, how many people are on the archives team at GBH?
Let's see, the National AV Group I mentioned at the beginning, is that the Library of Congress's National Recording Preservation Plan? I can put that in the chat. Or, maybe we're talking about the Association of Moving Image Archivists? That might be it.
Yeah, I think that might be it.
Here is the, I'm sure Ed has that handy, but here's the link to the EMEA website.
Yep, and I will share that in the chat. Yeah, this is always interesting to do the to do the back and forth this way.
I'll put in the National Recording Preservation Plan as well for folks to read.
And that's from Clear?
That's from the Library of Congress and Clear.
Okay, and other people are also noting that EMEA is a great organization. I would personally recommend their conferences are a lot of fun in person. Okay, sorry, now I'm trying to keep track of the questions here. Would you restate the 2 OER resources you shared?
Yes.
Thank you for your thoughtful and informative presentation.
Yep, I will put both of those in the chat as well. The American Federation of Teachers Share My Lesson. And the National Humanities Center Humanities in Class Digital Library.
Okay. I do actually have my own question, and since I'm moderating, I get to ask it. The program platform that you use for auto transcription, is that an open source platform?
Yep, we use Caldy. It is open source. I can put some documentation here. It requires understanding of like Docker, and we have web developers who work with us on our team who have been helpful in setting up the use of Caldy on S3 servers to be able to process transcripts in a batch level. So yes, but it is open source if you have anyone on your team who can work with you to install it, but I will put some information in the chat. Let me just find that.
Okay, and we have several questions coming in that I'm sharing with you in the chat area. The first is, how do you deal with the growing terabytes? And I have a feeling you might have crossed terabytes of digitized AV materials.
Yep, I actually think I missed one of the questions earlier. Someone asked how many people we have on our team.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
So working on the AAPB, since I talked most about that today, we have 2 project directors, one at the Library of Congress and one at WGBH, and 2 project managers. That's me at GBH and Rachel Curtis at the Library of Congress. We also at GBH, through a Mellon grant, were able to bring on a full-time outreach manager that we've had working with us for the last 4 years. So a lot of the things that we've been able to do around outreach has been because we have someone dedicated to outreach on our team. We also have another full-time archivist working on ingesting materials into the AAPB collection, and then a couple other staff are able to help out as needed. In the GBH Archives as a whole, we have about 19 staff, which includes our stock sales and licensing team. That's 3 people. We have 3 web developers. That also includes our administrative, executive and business manager. So kind of a medium size, I guess now getting up to kind of a big size shop. Large, yeah. Okay, so going back to that question you just asked, Ed, how do we deal with the growing terabytes of digitized AV? We're now into petabytes with the AAPB collection. And thankfully, we have the Library of Congress as our partner who is preserving all of the material. So it's not something that GBH has to deal with for the AAPB as a whole, but we do manage our own collection at GBH. We're currently in the process of digitizing about 83,000 of our tapes, which is going to result in over 1 petabyte of data. We're just getting started with that. For storage, we're storing everything at GBH. We're storing everything offline currently on LTO 8 tapes, but we also have a version, a preservation copy stored in our local cloud using Object Store. And that's kind of our preservation strategy right now. But we're in the process of having to migrate all of the things we had stored on LTO 6 tape to LTO 8 because LTO 6 has now become obsolete. I'm interested to see over the next 5 years, DNA storage become more of a viable long-term option. Right now, it's way too expensive for any of us to afford, but I was talking with a DNA storage company recently, and they think that they're going to be able to get their prices down to comparable with LTO tape in the next 5 years.
Okay. Can you expand on your strategies for managing people and projects remotely?
I would say, as I mentioned earlier, listening and intention, but practically that means just I have 3 people who report to me directly, and then a few other people who they manage. But we have regular check-ins. I have check-ins with each person times a week, depending on how frequently they want to meet and feel the need to meet. Zoom meetings where we touch base on what their goals are. We also have team meetings that engaged and informed of what our goals are for the week, but also looking more longer term. What the foundation's goals are and where we're heading, so that everyone kind of feels like that they have a stake in the overall organization. We also regularly communicate on Slack, on GitHub. So communication is a really big key to that, and trying to continue with active communication and listening to each other in a remote environment through all the tools we now have available.
Yeah, and I just to add on to that, this is one area where I think COVID really helped with rapid deployment of better tools and making them more easily accessible.
Definitely.
Okay, could you talk more about clams? And I'm assuming that we are not talking about the chowder type.
Yes, no, some of our presentations about clams, we have used that analogy.
My institution has a lot of oral histories with elderly people, and they can be difficult to understand. Would clams eventually help with that?
So currently what we're doing with clams is, like I mentioned earlier, we're focusing on the data that we can glean from the audio and the video. So that's speech-to-text transcripts. We're trying to improve quality, the speech-to-text tool that I talked about earlier, to integrate some algorithms that kind of pre-process and post-process the audio and then the resulting transcript. So right now, quality out of the box doesn't recognize when there are multiple people speaking. It doesn't recognize when there's music in the background. So we're working on improving quality to create higher quality output, being able to segment the audio with this is speech, this is music. Don't try to create text out of the music. In addition to quality, we're working on trying to get metadata that's present in the video. So the slate that appears at the beginning of the program, the lower thirds that appear when someone is introduced for the first time on the screen, the credits as they roll at the end. That's all data that if we were able to capture it and OCR it, and then where to put it in our metadata repository, it would tremendously help with increasing the description of the material that we have. We're very much in the early stages of this. We've been doing pilot testing of tools, working with Brandeis over the last 2 years. And now over the next 2 years, our goal is to start chaining these tools together, building it up into a robust open source platform that any archivist would be able to use, building in ways for archivists to train the tool to reflect what they're seeing in specific collections. Like this collection has a slate that's all handwritten and it all looks like pretty similar, but it's very different from these NewsHour videos like I captured earlier that were all machine text. So I think in the future, we're going to need archivists to be able to work with these tools, as a way to more efficiently create data about our collections. But keeping in mind that I think we're going to need humans to continue creating this data well into the future, because machines have a very long way to go.
Curious, how were you able to make your position remote? Because it sounds like it happened before COVID. Is that something you requested, or is it something the organization was pursuing?
That is something that I requested. I had lived in Boston for several years and was pretty homesick. I'm from Mississippi, as I mentioned earlier, and I asked, and it was several months of talking about it and figuring out how to make it work. And we tried it. We tried it for 6 months to see if it would work, and I think it did. But 6 months later, pandemic hit, and we all were forced to become remote. So we've all had a chance in our department to figure it out over the last couple of years. And I do think in a lot of institutions, we will see some changes in post-pandemic life. Hopefully we'll get to spend, more of us will get to spend a little bit more time with our furry friends.
Yeah, mine keeps walking around back here. When you have audio visual material in other languages, do you recommend both transcription and translation?
So this is something we're about to start working on at GBH. Right now, the quality speech to text tool that we use, the language models are in English only. So we did just get a grant, as I mentioned earlier, to work with WIPR in Puerto Rico. And we're going to pilot creating speech to text transcripts using Amazon Transcribe for that collection, because they do have Spanish language models. And then we are going to explore, after those are corrected, we're going to explore what an auto-translated transcript looks like. Again, we don't expect it to be fully accurate, and the semantics of languages is going to, have a big impact on the output. And but it will create what keywords, metadata that can be searched and discovered through the search engines and through our catalog. But through my work with University of Tennessee, we are recording oral history interviews in Spanish. We're creating transcripts of those, and then we are correcting those transcripts, and then we are creating translations. But it's a very time-consuming process, and so we're able to do more of that hands-on work with a much smaller collection compared to thousands of items we're working with at GBH.
Well, and I know, and Leslie would talk about this, that LPB, Louisiana Public Broadcasting, has French-only programming as well. That has been, I think it is in AAPB, isn't it? Yeah. Is your crowdsourcing transcription platform homegrown or open source?
The crowdsourcing platform was actually initially created by New York Public Library. It was called their transcript editor tool, and I will put information about that in the chat. And it is open source and that you can install at your institution.
Great. You mentioned receiving 0 takedown notices for GBH material. Did that inspire the organization to go a little bit further on the copyright issue, or was it just viewed as a confirmation that your processes are working?
So we have received 0 takedown notices for the American Archive of Public Broadcasting in 6 years. But when we started out, we felt pretty confident in our strategies. We had worked with Berkman Klein Center at Harvard, the legal counsel at GBH, and the Library of Congress were on board. We had documentation and policies about the decisions that we made and why we made those decisions. So we didn't just put everything online and see what happened. We have a very robust workflow that we follow that we feel really good about. And so yes, 6 years down the road, I feel it's affirming that we're doing a good job, and we're not only making stuff available, but but respecting the copyright owners as well. So keeping that balance.
So speaking of which, what is your protocol for addressing the problem of copyrighted music being used in a video? This appears to be a problem in commercial broadcasting where music has been stripped from old TV shows because of the difficulty obtaining rights.
So for public, there's actually a exemption in the copyright law. I think it's section 112 of the copyright law that is an exemption for public broadcasters to be able to use music in programs, incidental music. So that's what we're relying on to be able to make available videos that contain music in the background. So recorded music programs is a little bit different when the focus is on the music itself, like a jazz program. We have a bit more stringent of a policy on that. If we're making available jazz programs, this is just an example. We've got some examples where we have a jazz series and the host comes on and introduces the song and then just plays it, but doesn't go into a lot of detail and not much commentary, not much reflection or criticism. They're basically just spinning records. For those, we have decided that we feel confident that we can make available at a low risk just a few programs per year of the series online, and the rest of it would be on location only, but we can provide representative samples per year. But then we have other types of jazz programs where they are providing significant commentary and analysis. We feel that making that full series available online is more of a fair use because of that criticism and analysis. So we have made available one series that had a lot more that commentary within it. We put the full series up. Most people are just really pleased.
Would that include recorded concerts and things of that nature?
No, that's all recorded music. So sound recordings, live music performances, those are all kept on site only, unless we get permission from the performers, and we haven't gone through that to that level of rights clearances.
Okay. That is interesting. I've actually run out of questions. So if somebody wants to ask a question, you can put it in the Q&A area and you will be, next. If not, what are some of the, aside from the DNA storage, which has sparked quite a back and forth in the chat area, what are some of the things that you're hopeful for, or you think will be significant challenges in, let's say, the next 5 to 10 years?
I've talked about some of those in my presentation already. One thing that I didn't kind of go into a lot of detail or didn't focus on in this presentation that I feel very passionately about and am concerned about, alarmed about, is the climate crisis and its impact on our profession. And the fact that currently I don't feel like we're prepared for 2030 or 2050. What scientists are telling us is facing us in the next 10 years if we don't dramatically reduce the fossil fuels that we're putting out into the air. We're going to see 2 degrees Celsius increase in our pre-industrial carbon dioxide in the atmosphere within about 10 years. So say the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they've made some pretty drastic, not drastic, but they've made some pretty stark forecasts of what the world's going to be like in the near future. And I'm concerned that we as a field are not prepared to address those within our local communities and also nationally. So I would strongly encourage everyone to read the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports to become more familiar with the challenges that we're facing. And there is work being done already in the field. Project ARC, which I was one of the founding members of, is doing work in this area. But it's a concern that I think we all need to be thinking more about.
I definitely agree. Some of my colleagues and I have been starting to do some work, but that will be saved for part of my presentation later in the conference. Well, without seeing any further questions being submitted, although people are agreeing about the issue of climate change and not being prepared, many people from Texas talking about the freeze in February and power outages, and how big of a deal that was. But we have a few minutes left. Is there anything else that you would like to share? Or, as my dog is now making noise in the background, or we can let people go to lunch early.
That sounds good.
Okay, well,
I don't have anything else, but thank you again so much for inviting me. And I'm looking forward to all the presentations. I've gone through the schedule and everything looks great. And I'm excited to continue learning this week from all of you.
Well, thank you again for your presentation. For everybody else, please join me in a virtual round of applause. I wish there was a better way of doing that, but I'm sure in the chat box we will see it. For your presentation, we truly do appreciate hearing your reflections about, well, everything and how it's moving forward. Upcoming on our schedule, we do have a lunch break, but be sure to check out the many repository tour videos as they premiere during your lunch break. And you can head over to the on-demand tab to do that. I am extremely impressed with these tours. Some of them are behind the scenes in places that I've tried to get into and haven't been successful. At 1 p.m. Central Time, we have 2 sessions, community-based archives and statewide collaborative projects. So we'll see you at those. Finally, don't forget to check out the silent auction items and purchase Slotto tickets, which you can do from the main website. So for right now, I bid